You know, Rebels, if you've been checking out some of my promotional ads on social media, you'll be aware that I have been using a lot of AI programs to help me create ads. But you know what? There's a lot more uses for AI than just funny little videos. And I'd like to introduce one of our new sponsors, Podium. It is a leader in creating AI tools for podcasters. Now, let's say you've got a podcast, or maybe you're even thinking of doing a podcast. You're probably wondering, well, how can AI be integrated with your workflow? I'll tell you about Podium. As a podcaster, you know that writing show notes and creating chapters and transcribing episodes takes a lot of time, and it can cost you a lot of money too. But you know what? That's where Podium comes in. It's an AI tool designed specifically for creators and podcasters with the goal of making post-production tasks quick and easy. And in just a few minutes, Podium generates show notes, chapters, summaries, clips for social media, a full transcript, suggested episode titles, social media posts, and more. Whew, that's a lot of work for one little program. Your show notes are key to your podcast's success because it helps new listeners find your podcast and they'll know if it's a fit for them. You know, kind of like Too Many Podcasts. It also improves your SEO, that's your search engine optimization. Ooh, big phrase there. And overall accessibility. And with Podium, you can focus on creating a great podcast and let Podium's AI do the heavy lifting. But Podium isn't just for solo creators and podcasters. It's a game changer for editors, producers, marketers, agencies, and production studios. Teams that use Podiums are able to increase workloads, decrease turnaround times, and improve their quality. How does it work? Very easy. First, go to Podium's website, and you'll see that link that's right there in the show notes. You get 3 hours free just to try it. Pretty cool, huh? And using that link also supports this show as well. And you know what else happens? Because I'm a good guy. You use my link, you will get 50% off for your first month. So visit the site, upload an MP3 file, and download your files, and that's it. And if you need anything else, you can use Podium GPT to generate articles and any marketing copy you might need in seconds. Instant show notes, transcripts, chapters for your podcast or channel. This will level up that podcast. So check out Podium today.
The Sherpa's Podcast Picks is presented in cooperation with Thresher PR, which is headed by Stephen Joyner. We now take you to the Sherpa Chalet, where Jim the Podcast Sherpa will be interviewing podcasters near and far. Personally, if you've ever stood next to the Sherpa, you'd hope it will be far. That new yak-scented shampoo isn't getting him any new friends.
You've tuned in to a listen to this episode of the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. Straight from the Sherpa's playlist, it's Dr. Andrea Wojnicki of the Talk About Talk podcast, along with an episode of her show. We should always note the importance of communication in the business world. Sometimes things would be so quiet in the medicine factory where I worked that you could hear a cough drop.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpalution, and welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It is me, the Sherpa, Jim the Podcast Sherpa mainly, and I am coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I overlook the thousands and thousands of podcasts that are out there right here in Podcastia, and I get to share some of these with you. This is one of these special episodes. This is a listen to this episode. Why? Because we will actually be featuring one of the podcasts right here, and you get to sample your own episode. You get to be like the Sherpa and doing your own Sherpa sample. How do you like that? Now, back in March of 2021, I had a very delightful guest that we met online in one of the podcast connection websites, and her name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and she hosts a podcast called Talk About Talk, and she's really kind of niched it down to communication skills for business professionals, but really she's kind of branching out as well while she's doing this. Really fascinating stuff. We laughed so much the first time around, and I knew that I had to feature her podcast on this episode, and she was more than happy to share. Thank you very much, Andrea. So we hung out, we talked for about half an hour, and I think after the interview, we talked for another 45 minutes, just making each other laugh and just talking about this and that. You're going to like the format of this, especially I think Andrea's going to like this because it's really 3 sections. First, you're going to hear the interview that I did with Andrea, and that is going to segue right into an episode of Talk About Talk, and the episode is about how to introduce yourself. Now, you might not think that that's a big deal, but in the business world, though, that could make or break a person's career, believe it or not, because you've got to be aware of who you are and present that to the folks that you are meeting. After that, we'll follow it up with a little bit of Sherpa Samples, and then we'll be out of here. Power of 3. There we go. Gotta love it. So let's head to the interview, and part 1 will be my chat right now with Dr. Andrea Wojnicki of Talk About Talk. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the talking room, and my guest is a returning guest. She is a podcaster and an executive coach as well. Her name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, but don't call her Dr. Andrea. You have to just call her Andrea. Do not call her Phyllis because she won't answer to Phyllis. So we know that much. She's coming to us from the lovely city of Toronto. And we're going to be featuring her show today in case you tuned in, and you'll get to actually hear about the podcast that I enjoy listening to every week, or every other week, actually. Andrea, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Jim. And can I just say, you nailed it in terms of the pronunciation of my name. And most people don't. And they ask, did I say it right? And I just say yes, but you really did. Amazing.
I've been practicing all week. I'm walking down the street and I'm going, Wojnicki! And everybody's going, what? What happened?
That's funny.
And, so I figured by today I had to have it ready. I had little Post-its around saying, Wojnicki.
Very impressive. You've done your homework. I can't wait to hear what questions you have for me.
Okay. So now, you know what? It's easier for you to let everybody know what your podcast is about. So I don't miss any of the key elements here.
Sure. So my podcast is called Talk About Talk. And originally the premise was really about general communication, but now it's more about communication at work, specifically for ambitious executives. So we focus on overcoming imposter syndrome and communicating with confidence, elevating our listening skills, storytelling, but it's all in the work context. So things like how to deal with difficult people at work, influencing and negotiating. I would say the topic that gets the most traction at Talk About Talk is personal branding. So not personal branding as in, turning you into a social media influencer or monetizing your brand, but more about really establishing your professional identity and creating a focused reputation or identity that you stand for in terms of your career. That topic really seems to be getting a lot of traction in my one-on-one coaching, in my workshops, and also in the podcast. So, and that's related to the topic that we were going to talk about today, right? Which is how you introduce yourself.
No, I think, when was the last time we spoke? It was was it before COVID? I'm trying to think.
I think it was before or during COVID.
Or during,
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I got to figure that in that time, the world and how we communicate has got to have changed quite a bit, where there are things that we took for granted. Now, all of a sudden, they may be becoming a little bit more important.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of obvious things. One is just the prevalence of online communication, right? So, for example, when I'm coaching people on their communication skills, I get a lot of questions about, so when I'm online, do I need to wear a headset? How important is my meeting back? I'm pointing at my meeting, my background right now. How important is my background in my online meetings? Those kinds of questions, like how do I convey body language when all they can see is basically from my shoulders up, right? So the online context has become more important. And then the other thing that's it's so obvious is just AI. A couple of weeks ago, for the first time related to my personal brand, I entered into ChatGPT. So I have a paid ChatGPT account that I've been using for a long time. I don't know how long I've been doing, but for a long time. So it knows me, right? And I logged into my account and I asked it this question: what is something about me that you know from our interactions that I might not know about myself? And the stuff that it spit back was amazing. And I said, okay, I'm using this question now when I'm coaching folks on their personal brand. That's going to be one of the inputs. So yeah, I mean, I think since we last met, Jim, the two things are just the prevalence of online communication is one thing, and the second thing is just AI. That what I just mentioned there is just one of probably an infinite number of ways that we can use AI to help us with our communication. Yeah,
sure. Do you think that communication now, in the wake of all of this, has become a little bit more informal, and is that okay?
Ooh, so I think many things, including our communication style, are becoming more informal over time. So is your question, is it because of everything being online, or is it because of AI, or just generally?
Actually, you could really say a little bit of both.
Yeah, all of the above. So
just to make the question a little harder for you, Andrea.
Yeah, no, I love this. I love this question. So I don't think AI is probably responsible for making us communicate more casually. Is online communication responsible for that? Again, I would say not, because, you know, you and I are talking to each other right now over Zoom, and we're looking at each other. So I'm conscious of my body language. If I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So maybe in terms of how we dress, you know, I'm wearing a nice blouse. I actually have dress pants on, but you don't know if I'm wearing my sweatpants. I mean, so there's that. You know, the joke during COVID of everybody wearing their pajama bottoms with their suit jacket.
I'm in a prom gown and swim fins. So
yeah. No, I don't know that those things are necessarily. I think people just generally. I mean, COVID definitely inspired people to be more comfortable, right? I think it accelerated the adoption in my. So this is not my expertise, right? But I observe fashion, and it's like running shoes. People stopped wearing stilettos and they're wearing running shoes to, like, I meet my clients in downtown Toronto who are, you know, senior executives, and they're wearing their designer running shoes. They're designer, but they are running shoes, right? And before COVID, they were definitely wearing, you know, dressier clothes. So yeah, I think that that the whole COVID experience and working from home definitely accelerated the adoption of casual clothing, but casual communication, not necessarily.
Yeah, because I would think, you know, especially like after COVID, like when it first hit and everybody was kind of like, well, what are we going to do now? And it really forced people to think on their toes. And like you said, the Zoom thing comes along, and with that brought a whole new almost set of rules in a way, not strict rules, but just very loosely held rules about, you know, you make an appointment, and then, you know, you got to have this in the background, and, you know, little tiny things that maybe, you know, in the business world itself might not exactly have made a difference. But I guess in the post-COVID world, we're probably taking some of that with us. And then it becomes a little bit more accepted, instead of just making an exception to doing something due to an emergency situation.
Absolutely. It's like there's no turning back. Right. You know, and it is interesting because most of our work communication, I think, was in person, right? Or through certainly through email, but I'm talking about like meetings.
Sure.
And now it's like, no matter where you are in the world, you have no excuse for not being there unless you're really, really sick, basically. Right.
Right. Yeah.
which is good and bad, I think. Right. It's like there's no hiding, but it also allows you to have some flexibility. You know, I have kids that play sports all over North America, and I can go to their camps and their tournaments and their games and still do my job wherever I am. So it's a good thing.
Now, and even in the time that we've spoken, your brand has really built up a lot too. You've done a lot more public speaking and a lot more coaching as well.
I'm working on it. Yes, I am, Jim. Thank you for noticing.
I mean, it's important though, especially, I mean, and I don't know if people know this, because you were actually an executive for Kraft in Canada for a while, right?
You've done your homework, Jim. Yes. Yes. Good memory. Yeah. I also was on the faculty at the University of Toronto teaching in the MBA program. And I actually hadn't done that for over 10 years, but last week, I went back for the first time and I taught personal branding, this topic that I tell you is getting a lot of traction. I taught it in their executive education program. And also the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine has brought me in to teach communication skills internally to their department and also to physicians across Canada. And actually there's some physicians around the world that are in that program. So, I mean, communication skills. I was also at a meeting 2 weeks ago at one of the big banks in North America, one of the biggest banks in North America. They brought in all of their coaches for their senior leaders. Mm-hmm. And at the very end, they said, the topic that's getting a lot of traction with our senior leaders is communication skills. And I went, yes. I went, thumbs up. And they all looked at me. Okay, that's a communication coach over there.
Is it unusual going from like doing your podcast where it's basically you or maybe you and a guest to you and you've got this big audience? Has that become weird for you? I know you used to do public speaking before you were doing the podcast as well, but even like having to kind of switch gears like that?
Yeah, I love all of it, Jim. I love your questions, by the way. You're so engaged and in the moment. I have to say, this is an aside, but today I was talking to somebody about a fellow podcaster who is a great guy, but we both noticed when we were listening that you can tell he has a script in front of him and he's getting through his list of questions. Uh-huh. Talking with you is like a real conversation. I love it. I really love it. So back to the question though about switching, I guess, contexts, right? From being in the classroom to doing keynotes in front of an organization or doing a corporate workshop, to recording a podcast. The truth is, I really love all of it. I think in my heart, I just want to make an impact on people and encourage them to think about things differently and maybe do things differently based on the research that I've done and the guidance that I'm providing. And so in any of those contexts, I can see how that could happen. And when I get feedback from people saying that I have made an impact on them, that just lights me up.
Yeah. And ultimately, either way, somebody's listening. You want to get your point through to somebody.
Yeah.
Whether you see them or not.
Yeah. Last week I had a woman connect with me and she said, I've listened to all of your podcasts. And I'm like, all of them? All 173 episodes? And she said, okay, most of them. And she said, I want to hire you to coach me. And she is an international aid worker. And I was like, wow, if I can impact someone who's doing really important work like you, right? Mm-hmm. Then that just, is so satisfying, which is another reason why coaching the physicians that I'm doing right now is just, next level.
That's probably something that you probably didn't imagine happening, where all of a sudden, like you're thrust in this unique position.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, first it was general communication, and then it kind of it definitely evolved to be focused on executives. Mm-hmm. And now folks in medicine and, like I said, international aid are coming to me, and it's like, this is all very good.
I know, like a couple of years ago, the actor Alan Alda was actually doing a podcast with medical staff, and he was like teaching them how to communicate better, like with their patients and stuff like that. But
yes.
Are you kind of going along that vein, or is there like a little bit more to it?
So, I mean, I suppose yes, but I have not strategically, proactively sought this out, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, the strategy was focusing on business executives.
Okay.
And I think that folks in medicine have identified that communication skills is something that can help them do their job better, right? So they're seeking communication skills experts, and here we are.
When you were talking about like how your most popular episodes are about personal branding, I love your definition for it, because it's what people say about you when you're not there.
Okay. So I want to talk about this. So Jeff Bezos has this quote. It's a very famous quote. And in fact, so many articles that I've read recently about personal branding, they'll share this quote, which is, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. Okay. And I say, that's less of a definition and more of like a mental exercise, right? So I would ask my clients, like, so what do you think your boss and your boss's boss are saying about you when your name comes up in that conversation about who to promote? That's your brand. And if you're not happy with what you think they're saying and thinking about you, then we can do something about that, right? Of course, you're going to be your authentic self, but I'm going to help you create a narrative, control the narrative about you. So that's the one definition. That's Jeff Bezos. Recently, I interviewed Seth Godin for one of my podcast episodes.
Okay.
And I asked Seth, I said, do you think about your brand? And he said, so I don't think about it as personal branding, Andrea, but I suppose it is. And he said, what I really do think about is what other people think I'm going to do next. And I was like, oh, that is a great like add-on to Jeff Bezos. So Jeff says, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Seth Godin says, your brand is what people think you're going to do next. So now I have another exercise I do with my clients, which is, what do you want to do? What do people think is conceivable? And what do people think is not conceivable? And then how do we reconcile this list? Right? Beautiful. So, but this is not my definition. Okay. So let me tell you what my definition, personal branding. So the work of working on your personal brand, it's about being yourself on purpose. And I say there's really two parts of that if you want to unpack it. It's being yourself. So it's your true self and it's your whole self. So personally and professionally.
Sure.
And then the on purpose part is no apologies. I am working on this in a disciplined and strategic way so that I can identify what my superpowers are, and then I can communicate them to the world, right? So it's personal branding is being yourself on purpose.
I like that.
Me too.
And it is important. I guess people really, in a sense, you want to be memorable in the right way to people especially in the working world, because even if you're not going to be there for long, at least, when you leave, oh yeah, I knew Andrea. She was the person who always did this. And, we really appreciated it for her. Not like, oh, not that guy who always had, spinach on his teeth and, crumbs all over his clothes or anything like that.
Or equally as badly, the person that's just forgotten.
Yeah. Right.
So I tell people that personal branding is also, it's not about being good at everything, right? It's not about like inflating your ego and it really is about identifying and prioritizing the unique things about you that you know are true, the things that really stand out about you, and then sharing them with the world. And I said, if you look around at the people that are the happiest and the most successful, they are leaning in full tilt on the things that are unique, their unique strengths and their unique expertise, right? So in sum, I say unique is better than better. Stop trying to conform to what other people think is the better version of you or what people should do, and double down on your unique traits.
That's true. And people have got to have to, I really should accept, you the way that you are presenting yourself. But I mean, obviously, you've actually got to know too, what's right and what's wrong. You can't just be, you can't be too outrageous in certain business settings because,
right.
They're going to be like, no, you don't belong here. Yeah. There's the door.
So here's what I say to that, Jim. I say there are a million ways of telling the same story.
Mm-hmm.
Why not tell your story in a way that serves you? Right? So you know your strengths, your weaknesses, your foibles, your superpowers. And so when you show up at work or in life, frankly, why don't you talk about those things and reinforce them in others in a way that's going to serve you, right? So for example, I've had a couple of clients who have what they would call a wicked sense of humor. And they said they try to hide their sense of humor because they're always cracking jokes. They're like, my default in my brain is that I'm always joking, and I just need to put a lid on it. And I said, well, your boss knows you have a sense of humor and you just got a big promotion. And I think there's a way of like, I'm certainly not advocating that you tell off-color jokes, right? Or
Right.
that you become the stand-up comedian of the office. But you might want to share a phrase about your sense of humor with everyone that frames it in a positive way. Like, I'm the person that brings levity to dire conversations at work, or I'm the one that people depend on for the optimistic and fun perspective, right?
Mhm.
I make work fun, right? Like, so figure out what the narrative is that you want to reinforce and go with it. Even if it's something that you think you're trying to, and perhaps even especially if it's something that you're trying to hide, there's got to be a way of creating a narrative around that characteristic or that trait
Right.
that is genuine and true and positive.
So with the personal branding actually kind of ties into the episode that you want to feature on today's show, that the people who are listening to, how to introduce yourself.
So it certainly does, Jim. When I coach folks on their personal brand, we spend a lot of time articulating or identifying what their brand is. And then we spend less time on the how to actually communicate it. Because I say garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. If you spend a lot of time figuring out what your brand is, it suddenly becomes really easy to communicate it. That said, there is this one communication mode that we all have, or medium, I suppose, context or opportunity. And that is the self-introduction. This is the most direct way that we have of reinforcing our personal brand. Think about it.
Mhm.
When you introduce yourself, it is your words about you from you, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And it's also often a first impression. Ooh, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. So I know that people feel a lot of angst about this. And I was getting a lot of questions from my clients, typically in one-on-one coaching, on how to introduce themselves. So I came up with this 3-point framework, which you can hear in the episode. And I started coaching folks on it. And then they started telling me that they were using it and how great it was. I wrote up the framework, and I submitted it to Harvard Business Review. It was published in August 2022 as an article at Harvard Business Review. And in 2023, that article was one of the top 3 most downloaded articles at hbr.org.
Wow.
So I know, so it also is, of the 173 episodes of my podcast, episode 86 is still number 1 in terms of downloads. So
Wow.
yeah, I know.
We've got the number 1 folks here.
Yeah, this one gets a lot of traction. And so why is this so popular? It's because of the anxiety that we feel, right? It's a first impression.
Right.
I don't know what to say. How long should I talk? Should I mention something personal? Oh my God, am I going to be talking too long? Oh, I forgot to say something. And then, you realize as you're ruminating about this or anticipating this, that you haven't been listening to anyone else's self-introduction. If there was a quiz on names, you'd fail because you haven't heard anything, right? Everybody always nods and goes, yes. And I said, I know, me too. Same with my clients. That's why I created this framework. So I think that the episode probably was shared by a lot of people because it is so simple. It is so simple. And it's like, you read the article and you're like, okay, I'm never going to have anxiety about introducing myself again.
On your show, you always ask everybody the 3 rapid fire questions. I don't know if you've ever been asked it on a show. Have you?
Has anyone asked me the questions? I answered, I used to have 5 rapid fire questions, and I did an episode where I answered the 5 rapid fire questions. But do you have rapid fire questions for me, Jim?
I do. I was going to actually ask you some of the ones that you asked.
Amazing. Let's do it.
Okay. I think I know the answer to this one, but we'll just do it. Introvert or an extrovert? I would say extrovert.
Off the charts. Off the charts. I recently redid the Myers-Briggs questions. And I was like, maybe I'm regressing to the mean over time as I get older. No, I'm still off the charts extrovert.
Your preferred method of learning?
Apparently, the academic research on this one is that this has all been debunked, and that people may believe they have a certain way of learning, but the research shows that sort of multimodal, multimedia learning works best, blah, 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 whatever. That said, if someone starts talking to me, believe it or not, even though I'm a podcaster, if someone starts talking to me and like my husband, it drives him crazy because he'll be like, so for our vacation, I booked this on this day and then we're going to do that. And I'm like, I need to sit down and write this down. Like it has to be visual. So the answer, sorry, this is not very rapid fire. The answer is I am very visual.
Yeah. I'm like that as well. So,
so how ironic is it that both of us have podcasts and we're visual learners?
I think, I don't know, because maybe sometimes when it's verbal, there might be a little bit of a, I don't know, there's something like maybe like a twist to it that we're not, where maybe we're not hearing it the right way, or we're kind of interpreting it already, as opposed to like something visual. It's like it's right there in front of you, and then like maybe your imagination jumps into play a little bit better. I don't know.
So I've heard that with audio and the same thing with reading, when people read written words, their brain creates the story in their head, right?
Yes.
So in that way, imagination is actually improved. So if I think you're onto something, right? Like if I see it in front of me, it's like I can track it. That's the way I put it, right? I can track it better when I see it. So I'm writing my business plans for 2025 right now. And I had like, paragraphs and points written out. And then I started diagrams. Who's doing what are we doing? What are the metrics? And as soon as I started creating diagrams, everything just started flowing, right? As opposed to paragraphs and points. Yeah.
Yeah. And the third, because I know you are a fan of the power of three. So is there any specific podcast or book or a course that you would recommend to the folks that like to listen to your show?
So I have, as you can see, Jim, behind me, lots of books that I have read that I recommend to people. I just finished reading Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, which is he's the founder of Nike.
Okay.
And so I really recommend that book to entrepreneurs. I never considered myself to be an entrepreneur until recently. And now I'm trying to really build my business. And I've caught the entrepreneurial bug. If you are working for a small company or trying to build a business, I really recommend that book. Oh my goodness. It's so inspiring. I just this week released a podcast episode where I'm turning around behind me to look at my bookshelf, where I interviewed Dr. Tasha Eurich, who wrote
self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Very good, Jim.
Yeah. I listened.
Yeah,
I was ready.
She's so brilliant, isn't she? She's lovely.
Yes.
She also has color-coded bookcases, just like I do, which is crazy. So I really
didn't notice that.
Yeah. Oh, when she and I logged on to our Zoom meeting and we both looked at each other, it was like, oh, wow. I'm looking at my twin. We both have color-coded bookcases behind us. I love that book. So her book Insight, I would say, is a little bit academic. Maybe that's why I love it. So if you're not up for that, it is academic. That's one of the reasons that I love it, though. It's all grounded in like research that she's done, and also, other peer-reviewed academic research. The other book that I strongly recommend to a lot of people is Chatter by Ethan Kross, which is about our self-talk, and particularly how to get rid of kind of our negative rumination that many of us have. And he's he does the primary research about what works and what doesn't work. And he's very specific about the hacks that we can adopt to improve our self-talk so that we can become basically fans of ourselves instead of constantly in our head criticizing ourselves.
So, of course, on our show, we have the portion called Shameless Self-Promotion, where you can let everybody know where they can find out more about your podcast and all the other stuff that you got going on.
So if you go to talkabouttalk.com, you can find everything there. I've got boot camps. I've got one-on-one coaching. I've got corporate workshops, the podcast. I've got a newsletter. I've got a brand new archetypes quiz where you can diagnose which archetype resonates the most with you, and that can help you inform your personal brand. There's all sorts of free resources there. So I would really go to talkabouttalk.com. I'm also on LinkedIn all the time. It's like my vice is going on LinkedIn.
I've tried LinkedIn and I'm just like, hello.
Oh, come on, LinkedIn, Jim. I will like you and promote you. Come on, let's do this.
I think I follow you on there. I'm not sure. I have to check.
Yeah, okay.
I always have one friend on LinkedIn. I'm linked.
Yeah, exactly. And then you become friends with all my friends.
I like that. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks again, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. The podcast is called Talk About Talk. And here comes the episode of How to Introduce Yourself. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, Jim, you make this so much fun. Like, I know we're still recording here, but I'm just going to say this again. It's like you have this superpower of being so engaged in the conversation. Like, really, I'm going to stop recording because I'm self-conscious now. You probably know this scenario. It could be an online meeting, or perhaps you're seated around a boardroom table. The meeting leader asks everyone to briefly introduce themselves, to talk about their background. Suddenly, your brain goes into hyperdrive. What should I say? Should I try to say something clever? How long should I talk? And then you realize you're not even listening to one word that anyone else is sharing. When's it going to be your turn?
3, 2,
Oh, it's my turn.
Go!
Hi there, I'm Andrea. So nice to meet you. My expertise, my passion is communication. I'm the founder of Talk About Talk, a learning platform focused on communication skills, where I coach ambitious executives to catapult their careers by improving their communication skills and their confidence. I earned my doctoral degree from Harvard Business School, where my dissertation focused on consumer psychology, interpersonal communication, and word of mouth. Yes, I'm obsessed with communication. It's so nice to meet you all. I can't wait to learn more about you, and I'm really excited to talk about introductions.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
How's that for an introduction? Greetings and welcome to Talk About Talk episode number 86, focusing on introductions. I'm your communication coach, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Please call me Andrea. And I'm so delighted you're here. Whether you are that ambitious executive, as I said in the introduction, or perhaps you have a growth mindset, or maybe both. If this sounds like you, well, then you're in the right place. I hope you'll check out the talkabouttalk.com website, where you'll find online courses, tip sheets, corporate workshops, one-on-one coaching, the archive of this bi-weekly podcast, and the free weekly communication skills training newsletter. As I said, in this episode, we're focusing on introductions. This is the first of 2 episodes focused on introductions. In this episode, number 86, we focus on how to introduce yourself. In the next episode, number 87, you'll learn how to introduce someone else. So, for example, if you're introducing someone to a group, or if someone's making a keynote presentation and you're introducing them to the audience. And you'll also learn in that episode how to elegantly and effectively introduce 2 people to each other. You know, when you're introducing 2 people online, or maybe at a cocktail party or a dinner party. For all of these contexts, I'm going to provide you with do's and don'ts. And I'm even going to help you with a little bit of scripting. You'll be a pro at introductions after these 2 episodes, I promise. And we all know introductions are important, right? You know what they say. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And a first impression is a lasting impression. Yep, those are cliches. But cliches exist for a reason. It is true. An effective introduction can help you immensely. An ineffective introduction can leave a lasting negative impression. But the good news is, this skill, making introductions, can certainly be learned. That's why we're here. So let's get into this. As always, you don't need to take notes because I do that for you. I'll briefly summarize everything for you at the end of this episode, and you can always access the printable episode show notes on the talkabouttalk.com website. So just keep doing whatever you're doing.
driving or walking or housework or whatever. Perhaps you're chilling out on the couch. Regardless of what you're doing, you don't need to take notes because I do that for you. Are you ready? Let me start with this. There is a reason why many of our meetings start with round table or these days round screen introductions. Introductions, all else equal, are a very good thing. Why? Well, there's a few reasons. Of course, it helps if everyone knows each other's names and affiliations, right? We can be more productive when we know more about other people. Secondly, thinking back to those cliches about first impressions, introductions provide you with the chance to make a positive first impression. We talk a lot about personal branding here at Talk About Talk. Introducing yourself is, simply put, the ideal opportunity to establish that personal brand in a way that you control. You're explicitly telling people exactly what you want them to know about you. And third, introductions also get everyone warmed up to participate in meetings. There are a couple of interesting reasons why this is the case. So, for example, we know that people pay attention when they hear their name. Our name is said to be our number one favorite word in any language. And we're more likely to use people's names if introductions are made. And furthermore, research shows that when people are interactive, specifically when they talk early in a meeting, they're more likely to stay engaged for the duration of that meeting. So if you're running a meeting, try to make it your default to kick it off with introductions. Now, of course, this will depend on the number of people and how well they already know each other. But kicking off a meeting with introductions will keep people more engaged for the entire meeting. Okay, so we get it. Introductions are important. They provide you with an opportunity to get to know people, to share information about yourself, to share your personal brand, and to make a positive impression. That all said, I don't know about you, but I've been talking to a lot of executives lately who truly, really dread this introduction scenario. Let's take a moment to briefly introduce ourselves. I'll go first, and your head starts spinning. So, for example, I've heard plenty of stories about people getting tongue-tied when they're introducing themselves. Maybe this has even happened to you. I've also heard many, many stories about people getting distracted by that guy. You know who I'm talking about. That guy whose self-introduction lasts over 10 minutes. What the heck is he thinking? There are 10 people here. We have an ambitious agenda. The meeting is 60 minutes long, and he just talked about himself for 10 minutes? Did he do the math? Maybe not. Or maybe he just thinks he's that important. It's selfish, it's distracting, it's annoying, and it's counterproductive. Am I right? And I've also heard stories from people regretting when they introduce themselves that they either say too much or maybe they say too little. They missed an opportunity to mention something that, in retrospect, they wish they'd mentioned. Does any of this sound familiar? Honestly, I've been there too. Trust me. But I've also learned some tips and a really effective script, or actually a framework that I promise is going to help you. Okay, so this framework. I'm really excited to share this with you. This framework is deceptively simple, and it works. It's 3 points, so it's also very easy to remember. Are you ready? It's present, past, future. So it's not a script. It's a framework. You will not sound scripted. You can customize this depending on your context. You just need to fill in 3 things: present, past, future. You may have noticed that this is not quite chronological. Did you catch that? It's not past, present, future. No, it's present. You start with a present statement, then the past, then the future. So start with a present tense statement to introduce yourself. Something like,
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wojnicki, and I'm a communication coach at Talk About Talk. My expertise, my passion, is communication. So what you're doing there is you're establishing something about yourself in the present tense. Of course, whatever that sentence is will vary depending on the context and the audience around you. We'll get into that in a minute. The second point in this framework is past tense. Here's where you can add 1 or 2 or maybe 3 points that provide people with relevant context. Or maybe these points can help you establish credibility with an audience. For example, for me, depending on the context, these points could include, first of all, how I started Talk About Talk 3 years ago. It could also include the fact that I earned my doctorate from Harvard Business School, where my dissertation research focused on interpersonal communication. And then, depending on the context, I could talk about other work experience I've had, or maybe something personal, like the fact that I'm an extreme extrovert, or a hobby, my hobby of painting, or maybe something about my family. So this second point, the past, is about relevant context and establishing credibility. So we've got present, past, and the third point in this framework is future-oriented. Typically, and perhaps ideally, it's the immediate future. So for example, if you're in a meeting, you could express your enthusiasm for whatever the meeting is about. Or if you're kicking off a new project or engagement with a new team, you could talk about how excited you are, or you could talk about your goals for the project. If you're in a job interview, you could say, I'm really excited about opportunities at this firm and I'm eager to learn more. Or if you're hosting a podcast episode, you could mention why you're excited about this topic and what the listeners will learn. So you close your introduction with a brief, relevant future statement. And ideally, it's an expression of enthusiasm. You'll hear that term again in a few minutes. Expression of enthusiasm. And that is it for the script or the framework for how to introduce yourself. Elegantly simple. The next time you're in a meeting and everyone's asked to introduce themselves, just think present, past, future, and then fill in the blanks. I promise you it works. Please, please, please email me at andrea@talkabouttalk.com and tell me how it goes. Of course, the content or the words that we say within that framework and how we say it will make a big difference. So, I have 4 specific suggestions to keep in mind when you're introducing yourself. Here they are: enthusiasm, context, precision, and personal branding. Let me take you through these one by one. First, enthusiasm. This is an easy place to start. Here's what you do. The self-introductions start going around the table or around the screen, and you remind yourself of the present, past, future framework. Then you smile. Not only will this release endorphins in your own blood, but it will also signal enthusiasm. And the research shows that expressions of enthusiasm lead to positive outcomes. Thanks to my friend, negotiations expert Tatiana Astray for that one. So start with a smile and eye contact. Be enthusiastic. If you're not really sure what to say first, my suggestion is you start with your passion. What are you obsessed with? What's your expertise? What are you enthusiastic about? I sometimes use the word passion. I'll say something like, I'm Andrea, and my expertise, my passion is communication. And then, just as I mentioned, you can end your self-introduction with your enthusiasm for what's coming up next, your future statement. It could be your enthusiasm for a meeting, a project, an engagement, the topic of a podcast episode, whatever. Got it? Okay, the first tip is be enthusiastic. The second tip is to consider your context. Consider your audience. Be empathetic. Consider what's important or relevant to them and what they might care about. Think of this as filtering what you say, depending on the person and the context. You probably have a lot of things that you could share about yourself. And as my friend Tom Megginson, the advertising copy strategist that I met on LinkedIn, suggests, filter, yes, filter what you share about yourself based on the context. It's not about changing who you are. It's about filtering what parts of your identity are relevant for this context. I love that. So now we've covered enthusiasm and context. The third tip for introducing yourself? Precision, as in keep it short. Keeping it short is relative though, right? But here's the insight. Shorter is better. Are you afraid that they might want more? Well, let them ask questions. Or you could say, I'm happy to talk more about this, but let's move on to the next person. No one ever criticized someone for making their introduction too brief. Think, here's the top line. If they have a follow-up question, they'll ask. The alternative is you being too verbose. And those who take up way more than their fair share of airtime talking about themselves, Keep it short and precise. There will be lots of opportunities for more detail later. So that's the third tip. Keep it short. We need to be enthusiastic. We need to consider our context or our audience, and we need to keep it short. The fourth and last tip, it's about leveraging your personal brand. Here's the thing. Many of us dread the round screen or round table introductions. But here's the insight. This is a rare and valuable opportunity for you to create or reinforce what you want people around you to know, your personal brand. So when the meeting leader suggests that everyone introduce themselves, instead of dreading this, ask yourself, what part of my personal brand do I want to communicate? So much of our personal brand is communicated implicitly. This is your chance to say the words that you want people to remember about you. So ask yourself, what expertise or experiences or credentials do you want people to know and remember about you? It turns out that being asked to introduce yourself is really not something to dread. It's actually the opportunity for you to communicate the precise things that you want the people in the room to know about you. And you can be very strategic and purposeful about this. So I hope that's clear. The fourth insight or tip is to leverage your personal brand when you're introducing yourself. Okay, so that's it for the first episode on introductions and how to introduce yourself. We have the 3-point framework for how to introduce yourself. Do you remember what it is? Present, past, and future. And then we have the 4 tips to keep in mind. Enthusiasm, context, precision, and your personal brand. Here's my sincere hope. What I'm really hoping you're going to get out of this. The next time you're in a meeting and someone says, let's go around the table and introduce ourselves, you are not going to dread it. But instead, you're going to think of this fantastic opportunity to share your personal brand. So take a slow, deep breath and think present, past, future. Then smile and demonstrate enthusiasm. You got this. Okay, I hope you let me know how it goes. Please email me, as I said, at andrea@talkabouttalk.com. Or you can go to the talkabouttalk.com website, click on Contact, and send me a message there. While you're on the website, I really hope you'll sign up for the Talk About Talk newsletter. This is your chance to get free communication skills coaching from me every week in a simple-to-digest weekly email. Just go to talkabouttalk.com to sign up, or email me directly and I'll add you to the list. You can email me anytime at andrea@talkabouttalk.com. I'd love to talk. Thanks for listening, and talk soon.
Now it's time for Sherpa Samples. Got a podcast for the Sherpa to sample? Let us know and we'll mention your name on the show.
That's right, Rebels. It's been a while, but it is time for Sherpa Samples, and it's a look at some of the podcasts that are out there on the podcast charts that I have been checking out just for you. Yes, you out there listening to this podcast from Podcastia. So let's talk about a few, shall we? 60 Minutes, A Second Look is actually created by the people who do the TV show 60 Minutes, which has been on, wow, quite a long time, I think 40 years or something like that. And the podcast actually has expanded versions of some of the segments that were featured on the show. So one of the episodes that I listened to was an interview with some of the cast members from the TV show Saturday Night Live, which has actually been on around 50 years, believe it or not. And some of the interviews with the earlier cast members. I think it was from like their 40th or something like that. I'm not sure. 6 Feet Under. No, it's not the TV show, but those of you who are professional wrestling fans may know who The Undertaker is, or better yet, known as Mark Calloway, because he's now retired from the ring. And it is a wrestling chat show. I guess he has a lot of his friends who were former wrestlers or current wrestlers coming on the show, and they talk about all sorts of stuff, pro wrestling. So if you're a wrestling fan, definitely check that one out. Good, Bad, Billionaire. This one's kind of unusual. They took people who are, well, billionaires, and they go into their stories on how they earn their wealth, and they decide if they are good billionaires or bad billionaires. So, and the one I listened to was Jerry Seinfeld. Why are they talking about Jerry Seinfeld? That was terrible, I know, sorry. On the spooky side, there's a show called Knifepoint Horror. And it is created by a guy named Soren Narnia, who I believe wrote some of the stories that were featured in the show. Definitely a creepy podcast if you like creepy. Empty Bowl. Now, a while back, I think I commented that this was probably one of the strangest premises for a podcast that I've ever heard. And it is hosted by Justin McElroy. And you know, the McElroys are all over the place. They have major popular podcasts. I'm sure many of you have heard of My Brother and Me, and Sawbones. And there are so many others that go along with that. And this is a discussion about breakfast foods over meditative music. And now you would think, like, I'm not going to like this, right? I got to tell you, I really enjoyed this podcast. I liked hearing the stories about the Jumbo Pop-Tarts. Call me crazy. It's still the most unusual podcast I've probably ever heard of, but Justin McElroy, my hat is off to you, good sir. Decoder Ring is a look at some of the things that go on in society, and in this episode, they discussed what's behind mass hysteria and talked about some stories that led to mass hysteria in society. Gastropod is a podcast about food, and the episode that I caught was about gourds and pumpkins. Now, pumpkins are gourds, but not all gourds are pumpkins. Did you know that? And you can actually find out if you listen to this episode what exactly is in your pumpkin pie filling. You'll be surprised. Clooless is a podcast hosted by four guys. This is what I call the dog pile podcast, where they kind of talk on top of each other and make each other laugh. That's what they do. If you are a fan of that kind of humor, you may like this podcast. Criminal Attorney is a true crime podcast. The story has to do with a FBI agent who is being followed by a criminal attorney. Hence the title, I know. And lastly, okay, this had to happen sooner or later, I guess. This podcast is called Talk Tuah, and maybe for those of you who are busy on social media, you know who the Hawk Tuah girl is. Her name is Hailey Welch. Well, yes, they gave her a podcast, and the description was that she talks to celebrities that are just like her. Okay. I don't really want to say too much bad about this. I mean, she's a young lady from Tennessee who got famous really from something that she said, and admittedly so, she said when she was drunk. So she's just a down-home girl, like sitting on her front porch, and she was talking with her friends and her grandmother in the episode that I listened to. And I thought what's actually cool is that Hailey Welch actually has a charity for animals where she raises money. So I think that's really cool. So I don't really want to say bad stuff about Hailey Welch. So good on you, Hailey. And all right, if I'm going to make a comment, I'll just say, I hope she doesn't spit when she talks. There. Let's head into the outro, shall we?
Let's get back to the Sherpa. Sorry about that.
No! I'll ask you a really easy question, Rebels. How could you not have fun communicating with a communications coach? Of course. That's a no-brainer. Thanks so much to Andrea Wojnicki for coming on the show, and be sure to check out her podcast. Subscribe wherever podcast apps are, and you can find her podcast, Talk About Talk, of course. And, you know, it's not really only for business applications, I feel. A lot of it actually applies to non-business situations, too. You can really learn a lot, and she's so much fun, too. And maybe even follow her on LinkedIn if you are on LinkedIn, because I think she's like a goddess over there or something like that, where I am a mere pauper. I don't know. I don't know what the hierarchy is over there in LinkedIn. But anyway, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you like this episode, you know what to do. Just subscribe on your favorite podcast app as well. You can hear us on podcast apps everywhere and the Sherpalution YouTube page. And don't forget, drop me a line on social media at Sherpalution, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X, wherever. Let me know what's on your podcast playlist. I would love to hear about that. Maybe it's a show that I need to check out for my Sherpa Samples. I hope so. But thank you all for listening. And until then, I'll see you next time. So viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpalution!